Hi everyone. The last two videos I made were about kings and queens. So if you have not seen those videos, go back and watch the one about the royal family and what king and queens are. But starting now, I'm going to tell you a few stories of fictional characters of kings and queens. So remember, fiction is a made-up story. It is something that might happen, and there are elements of it that could be real, but this is a story that somebody made up. So listen as I tell you the tale of King Midas and the Golden Touch. Once upon a time, there lived a very rich king whose name was Midas. Although King Midas lived long ago, he was very much like some people today. He was fond of gold. He loved gold more than anything in the world. When he gazed at the gold-colored clouds of a beautiful sunset, he would wish that the clouds were real gold. If King Midas loved anything as much or more than he loved gold, it was his little daughter, who he named Marigold. When Marigold would run to meet him with a bunch of buttercups, King Midas would say, "Dear child, if these flowers were as golden as they look, then they would be worth picking." Every day, King Midas spent many hours locked away in a dark room in the basement of the palace. In this room, he stored his treasures. He would go there and carefully lock the door behind him. Then he would take out bags of gold coins and pour the coins in piles and run his hands through them. As he did this, he would whisper to himself, "Oh, rich King Midas, what a happy man you are." But even as he did this, he felt that he was not quite as happy as he might be, for no matter how much he had, he always wanted more. One day, as King Midas was enjoying himself in his treasure room, he looked up and saw a strange young man who shone with a golden glow. King Midas knew that he had locked the door so no one could get in the room, yet here stood the man. And so King Midas thought the stranger must have some magic power. The stranger had a kind smile, so King Midas felt no fear. Then the stranger spoke to King Midas. "You are a rich man, King Midas," he said. "Yes, I have some gold," answered King Midas, "but it is not enough." "What?" cried the stranger. "You are not satisfied?" King Midas shook his head. "What would satisfy you?" asked the stranger. King Midas imagined one gold mountain heaped on top of another and another, yet still it seemed not enough. But then a bright idea occurred to him, and he said to the shining stranger, "I wish that everything I touch may turn to gold." The stranger smiled and said, "A golden touch? Are you quite sure you would be satisfied then?" "Yes, I would be perfectly happy and ask for nothing more," answered King Midas. "Then it shall be as you wish," said the stranger. "Tomorrow at sunrise, you shall find yourself gifted with the golden touch." Then suddenly a great brightness filled the room, causing King Midas to squeeze his eyes shut, and when he opened them, the stranger was gone. The next morning, when the sun had hardly peeped into the room, King Midas jumped out of bed. He touched a chair. It turned to gold. He touched the bed and a table, and they were all changed to solid gold. He rushed to put on his shoes, and they turned into gold in his hands. In great excitement, he opened the door and he ran outside to the garden. He saw so many roses in full bloom. He went from bush to bush and touched each one until every flower, every leaf, and every bud was changed to gold. Now King Midas was hungry, so he returned to the palace for breakfast. He lifted his cup of coffee and sipped it, but the instant the liquid touched his lips, it turned to gold. He tried to take a bite of a boiled egg, but it too turned to gold. "I don't quite see how I am going to get my breakfast," said King Midas. Just then the King Midas heard someone crying. He turned to see Marigold enter the room, crying as if her heart would break. In her hand she held one of the roses that her father had changed to gold. "Why, my little lady," said King Midas, "what is there in this beautiful golden rose to make you cry?" "Dear father," Marigold answered, "it is not beautiful. It is the ugliest flower that ever grew. As soon as I was dressed this morning, I ran to the garden to gather roses for you, but what do you think has happened? All the beautiful, sweet-smelling roses have been spoiled." "My dear little girl," said King Midas, who hated to see his daughter sad, "please don't cry." Then he bent down and kissed his child. "My precious Marigold," he said. But Marigold did not answer. Alas, what had he done? The moment King Midas's lips touched Marigold's head, her sweet rosy face turned a glittering yellow color. Little Marigold was now a golden statue. King Midas cried out, wrung his hands, and wished he were the poorest man in the world, if only he could have his daughter back again. Then he noticed someone standing in the doorway. It was the young stranger who had appeared the day before in King Midas's treasure room. The stranger still shone with a soft glow, and he smiled as he asked the king, "Well, King Midas, how do you like your golden touch?" "I am very unhappy," said King Midas. "Unhappy?" asked the stranger. "But don't you have everything your heart desired?" "No," said King Midas. "Gold is not everything, and I have lost all that my heart has really cared for." Then the stranger asked King Midas, "Which of these two things do you think is worth the most? The golden touch or your own little marigold?" "Oh, my dear child," cried poor King Midas. "I would not give one hair off her head even if you gave me the power to change this whole big earth into a solid lump of gold." "You are wiser than you were, King Midas," said the stranger. "Go and plunge into the river that runs by your garden. The water will take away the golden touch. Then fill this pitcher with water and sprinkle everything you have touched." King Midas bowed low, and when he lifted his head, the shining stranger was gone. Then the king ran as fast as he could and jumped into the river. He filled the pitcher and ran back to the palace. The first thing he did was sprinkle handfuls of water over the golden figure of his little marigold. The rosy color came back into her cheeks. She looked in surprise at her father, who was still throwing water on her. "Father, please stop," she cried. "See how you have soaked my dress?" King Midas took Marigold into his arms and kissed her. "Now I am truly happy," he said. "My dear child, you mean more to me than all of the gold in the world." If I were to ask you what were the 3 important characters in the story, could you think of all 3? King Midas, that's what the story's about. His daughter that he turned into gold, and one more important character. Oh, that stranger. Why did King Midas want the power to be able to touch things, to turn to gold? Well, I would say that he loved gold so much he wanted more than he could even imagine. Now, if you could describe King Midas's character, you might describe how he looks and what color hair he has or how tall he is, but let's think about him as a person. What is he like? Would you call him greedy? I think I would. I think I would call him greedy, but I think that changed at the end of the story. King Midas started off loving gold. He wanted more than he could even imagine. But he was more than just greedy. I think he was kind. He loved his daughter. When King Midas woke up with the power of the golden touch, I think he was feeling pretty good, wasn't he? He was very excited he had this brand new power. But his feelings changed, didn't they? Once he realized he couldn't live his life the regular way. Before he touched his daughter, do you remember other things he tried touching? They became a problem. He was hungry for breakfast. And as soon as he tried to drink something, it turned to gold. He would never be able to eat anything. Do you think King Midas made a wise choice to have the golden touch or a foolish choice to have the golden touch? I would say foolish. In the end, he almost really harmed someone he loved. I mentioned earlier that the story is fiction. Parts of the story, elements of it, could never happen in real life, but some things could. So let's think about those things that could happen in real life. Well, there are kings. There have been kings with daughters. They have fancy palaces. I bet kings do really have gold. But there are things that could not happen in real life. You can't be given the magical power to touch things into gold. And you can't all of a sudden get rid of that power by swimming in the water. I'm going to go over some of the words that were in the story just to make sure you really understand what they mean. The first word is fond, as in King Midas was fond of gold, fond of something. That means really liking it. Let me see what the definition says. Fond means having a strong liking, like I am fond of my best friend. I really like my best friend. Some of you are fond of My Little Pony, or fond of Iron Man, or fond of pizza. Another word from the story is gaze, as in when he gazed at the gold-colored clouds of a beautiful sunset, he would wish that the clouds were real gold. Gaze. Let's read the definition for that word. Gazed means looked at something for a period of time, like the family stopped at the side of the road and gazed at the mountains around them. Another word is satisfied, as in the part where King Midas said, I have gold, but it is not enough. And the stranger said, what? You are not satisfied? So let me read the definition to the word satisfied. Satisfied means happy, pleasant, or content. As in, Pablo put the final touches on his watercolor painting and felt very satisfied. In this story, King Midas was not satisfied. He was not happy with the amount of gold he had. The other word I was going to talk about with you was treasures, but I think you know what that word means. So thank you for reading the story with me and listening and learning with me, and I will see you next time for another tale involving royalty. Take care.